happy to be here, Stephen.
I want to start this interview in Herons Creek, this tiny little place north of Sydney where you grew up. It was a long way from anywhere, really. How come you there developed this incredibly vivid artistic imagination?
You know, at some point midway through my journey, I started to get quite self-conscious about, you know, and you do when you're young and you're trying to be someone and be creative. And I gave up on the self-consciousness of going too deep into who I am and tried to work that out just by doing. Having said that, you know, how do we get these answers short, right? Because I've never given a short answer in my life. But having said that, it never seemed exceptional, strange, or unusual to me. I always imagined when I was in that tiny little island, which was really a gas station and a restaurant, and we had a farm down the road. And
your dad ran the gas station?
My father ran the gas station, but what was crazy about it was that Dad was obsessed that the isolation wouldn't keep us isolated. So we had so many interesting people come and live with us, you know, painters, and he was sort of had this idea that we would be the Renaissance players of Herons Creek.
So was he an Australian who felt out of tune with Australia? Because, you know, my perhaps stereotypical and cliched vision of the Australia of your youth, particularly, you know, in the non-metropolitan areas, would have been about a very macho culture, you know, pretty much preoccupied with sports and maybe for the men, beer. And yet you gravitated to things including cinema and dance and a whole bunch of other stuff that were nothing to do with that stereotype.
Well, first of all, the stereotype, right? Because I think you're probably somewhat on point, but I would also proffer that one of the idiosyncratic qualities about Australia, which is a tremendous thing, is that it's what I would call a flashes of lightning culture, meaning you might look at Sydney and go, well, what a generic bunch of buildings, and then suddenly the Sydney Opera House, you know? And you might go, well, there it is, isolated at the edge of the world. But along comes a Gough Whitlam and our forebears who say, we must have a drama school. We must have a film school. This is in the 70s. And we, the government, will fund it. And had they not done that extreme action, I wouldn't be sitting here. All those well-known storytellers that you know wouldn't exist. So let's go back to my father. He was all those things. I mean, he was, you know, in the Vietnam War. He was the equivalent of a kind of Navy SEAL. That was his job. He was really disciplined. He really pushed it. It was such I now realize it was an extreme existence, but he was also he was a romantic, I think.
So I suppose because I'm going to fast forward a little bit, you got into acting, you went to Sydney, got into lots of different creative stuff.
I was already doing it, Stephen. I was making films.
Were you?
Yeah, I was always doing it.
So it was in you from a very early
And I was
age.
doing ballroom dancing. And ballroom dancing was a kind of, for me, working class escape into the theatre. I mean, you dressed up in costume, you performed, we travelled miles, you know, you got very, you know, wrapped up with your partner. I mean, it was showbiz.
And if you don't mind me